Uh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I probably could do a lot more research on, many of my conversations.
Uh, all right, sounds good. What are you drinking, Sam? Your life, by the way.
So I am drinking cold brew.
Oh,
I am
yeah.
a all season cold brew drinker, iced coffee drinker.
All
There you go.
Winter,
Do
season.
you
summer. Oh yeah.
do you make it yourself? I assume.
No, this is some Trader Joe's stuff. I have gone through the make it yourself
Phase.
phase, and every time I pay, you know, $8 or whatever for a bottle of Cobra, I'm like, why am I not just throwing some coffee beans and some water and doing this myself?
There you go.
It's
What
true.
about you, Miriam?
I'm drinking, got a seltzer and a big thing of water. My typical huge mason glass. What about you?
Just good old black tea.
Not mixed with anything today. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm staying at a friend's place, so I don't have all my options available to me. So I'm just drinking, what's available on the counter. So,
If you had more options, what would you be drinking?
Good question.
so normally the way I do my drinks during the day is that in the morning I brew coffee, and then once it is mostly done, I'll just put a black tea bag inside and pour water on it. And then once it is mostly done, I just put in a peppermint and pour water on it and continue doing that for the rest of the day. At some point, it just becomes completely water, like probably in the afternoon when I stop putting new, tea bags. But it's usually a mixture going on the journey.
Nice.
Transition down to water.
Yeah, exactly. Ramping down the caffeine. Uh,
Hmm.
all right. Thanks for joining us today. We have a very dear guest, Sam Charrington, that a lot of you must know. I don't think Sam needs introduction, but
If you know, you
maybe
know.
tell us a bit about yourself, something that people don't know much about you.
Uh, hey everyone, I am Sam Charrington. I am the founder of Twimmel and host of the Twimmel AI podcast. This is a podcast that I've been doing for the past 6 years now. In fact, we're just a week or so past the sixth anniversary, like the sixth anniversary of the first show that I posted.
Yay.
Twimmel comes from This Week in Machine Learning and AI. That was the name of the podcast when it started out. At that point, I thought that I would be, collecting these hundreds of links that I'd end the week with and kind of curating that down to the best 10 and like doing this news show for the week's news in AI. But that proved to be very difficult. And my wife said that, hey, I really like you, turns out, and I want to spend the weekends with you versus having you in a room creating this podcast thing. So I pivoted to interviews, and 600 interviews later, here we are.
There you go. So was the initial vision then to just collect news and talk about them?
Yeah, it was a period of time in AI that was, really exciting and kind of the culmination of a level of activity that I've been anticipating for a long time. And so I would end the week with, again, like hundreds of browser tabs, and all of it seemed really cool. And I wanted to learn all of it. And so I said, hey, well, if I uh, create this show and like put myself on the hook to whittle down all these links and like pick the best ones and summarize them. That'd be a win-win for everyone. But again, it proved to be a ton of work, and I felt super guilty about pivoting uh, to interviews. We were only 6 shows in on the kind of the news show, but I thought like I'd created this community and like I told them I was going to do this, and I thought that switching to interviews would be a letdown, but that's when we started to to grow, and people really like the interviews, the guest interview style, and it's been an amazing ride.
That's awesome. And what I love about your podcast, Sam, is you really go deep. Like there are a lot of podcasts we listen to that are very high level, stuff of what you're doing. Like, let's talk about the name of the model, to talk about high level, but your questions always go much, much deeper than any other kind of ML podcast I listen to. So thank you for that. And a good
Awesome.
segue into deep random talks today.
Deep and random. Love it.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, we are very, very familiar with the problem of many open tabs. And, to some extent, that's what we're working on to solve. But glad to hear that that's where you started too. And, definitely the pivot has worked out. So kudos to you for what you've built. And it's always very inspiring. So you said that you started from reviewing news and sort of pivoted to a new style, and then things started growing. So when was the first time that you started feeling you were building really a community, and what were your thoughts initially about what you wanted to do with that community?
Yeah, community was always an important part of what I was doing. Prior to starting the podcast, I was an industry analyst and had built up a pretty large community around cloud computing. And really thought of my role in the world, and I still do today, as I learn stuff that I'm curious about and think is going to be important, and I share that with the world. And folks find it interesting, I'm doing a good job. If folks don't find it interesting, I'm scratching my own itch. And so a part of that is the part that's providing value is like giving folks access to what other people are, the knowledge of other people, or what I'm learning. And it's always been a great part of the journey to connect with those folks. So in fact, I think that's how I met Miriam. I was doing some podcasting at one of the old O'Reilly AI New York conferences, and reached out to her, through she was running the NYAI meetup at the time, and we like created this happy hour event together and met some folks that were, in our joint communities. And I did a lot of that. I've done a lot of that over the years, and we've done a lot of community stuff on our platform as well.
Awesome. That was a really fun event back in the old days when we used to do in-person stuff, which is coming back. Cool. You've done a lot of community stuff in person, but then I know you also did some groups as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that really grew out of on the podcast. So it's related to, I'm assuming Rachel Thomas and Jeremy Howard and Fast AI. So I've been a big fan of theirs for a long time, and have had them both on the show. And I was doing a podcast with Rachel years ago, and said on the podcast, like, I admitted my guilt. I've been meaning to go through the Fast AI course for a long time now. I'm gonna do it. Does anyone want to join me? And a lot of people like reached out via social media and email and whatnot, and said, "Hey, I want to do this with you." And so that kind of prompted me to create the first study group. And I went through the course, and other folks went through the course with me, and we kind of talked about the material and traded notes. And that became a model for this idea of kind of learning together, became a model that we've replicated in our community. And today we've got a bunch of different study groups, and there's a Kaggle group where folks compete on Kaggle competitions together. There's an NLP group where folks share the work they're doing in NLP. There's just some talk about starting a group around the Thomas Wolfe Transformers, the NLP with Transformers book. Yeah, I've been a big believer in kind of learning together as a way to, stay motivated, as well as deepen your understanding of the material through conversation. And a lot of folks have found it really useful.
I love that. Definitely in our last GRT that I hosted with Amir, we talked about the future of education and machine learning and communities. And one thing about learning together is that accountability aspect that we were discussing before. And that's a huge component, I think, about actually coming together and making sure you follow through with all the stuff you want to figure out. And I love how your community is focused on kind of the learning together. Our community is focused on the building together, starting to kick off cool projects to bridge those two things. One thing that we are doing, quick PSA, we're kicking off a project where we take Sam's awesome podcasts and turn them into recipes. So you can have this interactive resource list of all of the resources mentioned in some of those great conversations that he's been having. So if you're interested in working on that, you can ping Amir or me, and it's a great way to learn together and put out some of the resources to others that might be interested in it.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this project. Those podcasts are often a wealth of pointers to resources and kind of tacit knowledge about the experiences that someone's gained in a different area, and taking advantage of that through your community and the work you've done to kind of document these recipes is super exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the topic of learning or building together, accountability is definitely one aspect of the story, but really the opportunity cost of not doing that is so large that I don't know how people who don't do it survive, right? So in our own community, we've seen a lot of I'm sure you've seen it in yours as well, Sam. There's a lot of self-organization happens when you bring in smart and motivated people and empower them to talk to each we ended up working on a lot of very interesting projects. Like we have this community group who has built this decentralized finance application, just pretty much out of nowhere. We didn't drive it. Nobody from outside was poking them to do it. They just got together. They've been meeting for almost a year now, working on this product. They're even at a stage that they're looking for funding for that project. They have this other group who is, again, like complete serendipity, got together, started talking about product development, and today they have developed this framework where they essentially partner with small companies or individuals who are trying to build an ML product and help them go through the initial stages of validation. They help them with de-risking what they're building. So there's definitely a lot of very interesting things happening when you bring in a lot of people in a room who are smart and motivated and say, go. And that's something that really gives me energy about what we are doing. And I'm sure you feel the same.
Yeah, I've had the same experience as well. A lot of the study groups that I've mentioned, these are all based on the interests of the folks in the community. Someone will chime in on Slack, hey, I'm interested in doing, XYZ. I want to explore XYZ. And, next thing you know, a group is formed. And I tend to think of our role as, kind of reducing friction. Like, oh, you need a Zoom, we've got Zooms, no problem. Oh, you need a Slack channel, we've got Slack channels, no problem. You guys, you want to record the video and people want to see it after, well, we'll take care of making sure that recording happens, getting it on YouTube, and all this other stuff. It's kind of a service to the community that we provide, so that the folks really only need to worry about identifying their shared interests and getting together and learning.
Yeah, for sure. On that topic, I think one of the examples that really inspires me is what Eliter, I'm hopefully pronouncing that right, Eliter AI did, where I think almost 2 years ago now, there was literally a conversation on some Discord channel somewhere that one of them was like, what if we built something like what OpenAI did? And somebody else responded this, but not ironically. And that was literally the beginning of it. And one of them happened to have access to TPUs. So they started, talking to each other and be, wait a minute, we can actually do this. Should we try it for real? So they tried to go around to different communities and ended up, for I guess various reasons, ended up creating their own version of a community. And they start training something similar to GPT-3 that came out, right around. I think they started from GPT Neo, and then later moved into GPT-J and such. But then, they even, again, like as you say, like some people in the community were like, wait a minute, how about AlphaFold 2? Should we try to replicate that too? So and they created Pile, which is a very large language model, said a lot of interesting things. So it's amazing how, like, when we think about work and contributions, traditionally a lot of the time, um, a lot of the time the work is done in a way that you do this and you get paid for it, and it's very transactional. But now we start to see situations and emergent phenomena where people just get together and they're like, what if we did this, and they actually do it. So it's very exciting to see where it is going. And have you seen any other examples like that you can highlight?
Yeah, there are tons of examples of this. I think one comes to mind is the I'm forgetting the exact name of the group, but there's it's either Tokyo Machine Learning or Tokyo Data Science. They have gotten together. They've gotten together and they do research together. Like they started as, I think, a similar group to what our community focus is on learning. But they had some folks that wanted to do research and to write academic papers, and that subset got together and is starting to do that kind of thing. But I think that there are tons of examples of folks that identify common interests, whether it's via communities like ours or on Twitter or social media, and end up starting companies or starting projects together.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Machine Learning Tokyo, um, and Suzanne, I think, is
Susanna
the one.
Illich, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah. I've interviewed her for one of our conferences. In fact, I think it was during the pandemic. Early in the pandemic, we did a community-oriented conference. So our kind of flagship conference is an event called TWIMLCon AI Platforms that's more focused on ML ops, more of machine learning and AI applied to kind of enterprise, productive use cases, that kind of thing, and the platforms that enable that. But we wanted to do something for our community. And so we created this event called TWIML Fest, and our community members submitted presentations and hosted activities and a bunch of cool stuff. But I focused the interviews at that event, the keynote interviews at that event, on the theme of community. So Susanna, Jeremy Howard, Salman Khan, who did Khan Academy as well. Again, lots of great examples of community in practice.
That's an awesome panel, and I would love a recording of that to listen to.
Yeah, it was separate interviews, but I love the idea of doing a panel with them.
Ooh, awesome. It's funny you mentioned Susanna, because she was also our contact for the big science project with Hugging Face that we did.
Nice.
Yeah, so we know her and her group through her interactions with Hugging Face. I mean, speaking of serendipity in a community, somebody reached out at some point and was like, have you seen this big science project, and I think you should be involved in it. So we reached out and started conversations with them, and they're doing this amazing project where they're like, we need to have the world's largest multilingual language model that is open source. which is a very interesting vision, right? Like, so essentially, they brought in. I mean, at the time that we joined, they had about 700 researchers and industry practitioners involved in the project globally. Like, it started by Hugging Face, but really gone beyond that. And as you say, they were the facilitators, but people on the ground who were doing the work were essentially anybody from anywhere. Uh, and like, they had 40 different working groups. Like, what's the governance of the data we're going to use? How are we going to prepare the training data? And we specifically participated in this part where apparently one of the problems that happened with GPT-3 was that you could go in and ask, what is the SIN number, or what is the American version, SSN, Social Security
Social
number?
security number.
Right. What is the Social Security number of Barack Obama? And it can probably answer. Or what is the password of GitHub repo of Sam Charrington, right? And it can probably answer that. So a lot of identifiable information was leaking. And that become dangerous because you could go in and ask, what is the political inclination of this person, right? And although it might not have been mentioned anywhere explicitly, it just pops out because the language model is large enough that can infer that. So the part that we participated was how to detect and tag personally identifiable information. There was another group on the government, because treating that is also not necessarily trivial. Like, okay, you identify the information, but is this allowed to be used or not? Was a governance question that another group was working on. But seeing this whole effort and the fact that they're actually training the model now is quite amazing. It's like very unlike anything that we have seen before. So quite interesting. Like, we're doing a lot of, as they call it, big science, run by citizens and communities.
Yeah, I was fortunate to have Thomas Wolfe, one of the Hugging Face co-founders, on the podcast a few months ago. End of March, I think we published the episode, and we spent a lot of time talking about big science. And it's a fascinating project. I think one of there were a bunch of themes that came up in that interview. One of them was this idea of multilingual model and the importance of that. And they asked folks to kind of curate and contribute these multilingual, or the data sets in their native languages, but they had contributors from multiple languages. And so they didn't need to crawl the web to find these data sets. They were all contributed. So this multilingual aspect was an interesting theme that came up. Generally, the idea of kind of what we're coming to know as data-centric AI, the idea of focusing on the data, rather than exclusively on the model. That was a key theme that we talked about. And then, of course, this idea of community, that's been kind of the early theme in our conversation here. What's been interesting, one interesting aspect of big science that kind of ties to some other conversations I've had on the podcast is, like, as these language models have been growing in complexity, and one of the consequences is that very few organizations have the resources required to train a state-of-the-art model. And so, a couple of years ago, a lot of the conversation was, well, that means that if you're not at one of these organizations, you can't really contribute anymore. And I think big science is at least, one counterpoint that says, hey, maybe there are community-based ways that, open up opportunity for researchers to contribute at a large scale.
Yeah, for sure. And the global and multilingual aspect of the project they're doing was really interesting point for us to be involved, because our community is so global, and people are speaking all sorts of languages, and especially for identifying nuances of the language, you could always scrape, but the going to be there. So that was definitely a very, very important aspect that we participated in as well.
Another interesting thing related to that from the conversation was that there was a strong desire that the data set that is used for big science to be representative of the type of language that's actually used by humans on the internet. But there's this disconnect between that and the language that's commonly used in benchmarks like Wikipedia. Wikipedia, if you've read Wikipedia, it's not necessarily, fluent human language in the set, or casual human language. Wikipedia has got its own kind of way of presenting information. And so they had this choice to make. Do we kind of optimize for the benchmark and focus on data that will likely score well in these benchmarks, or do we optimize on again what people are actually reading on the internet that was produced by other humans, and they optimize for the latter. And so the question is, there's an open question how well the models will perform on these benchmarks, or will new benchmarks be required, which creates more opportunities for research and collaboration.
Yeah, for sure. The interesting question is, I hadn't thought about that aspect, so that's definitely very interesting. And the question for me is, are the actual benchmarks that we have based on Wikipedia and news and such the best ways to judge language? Because if everyday conversations are not, like, nobody talks like a news anchor, or nobody talks like you're reading Wikipedia, right? Like right now we're not doing that. We're just doing a lot of jumping around and half broken sentences. At least I'm doing that. You're probably doing better than I do. But if people are actually talking that way, that structure and format, are the benchmarks that we have strictly an academic exercise of flexing muscles that, oh, I got this close to this thing, or does it have actual practical benefits? And at the same time, the other aspect of this, which is, okay, like OpenAI has a large language model and we can pay to use it, or Facebook or Google, etc. But how about the rest of us? It's a question of contribution for sure, but there's also the question of usage, like the practicality of these to solve industry problems, right? So definitely a lot of interesting questions there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So I was going to say, the interesting thing to me for the resources, and you mentioned earlier how a lot of the smaller organizations don't have access to resources. You might have been talking about compute and things like that, but we typically talk in the context of human resources and access to experts, which is why I think it is so important that something like community-driven science, or the way Michael Nielsen talks about it, network science. I think we've also seen community-engaged research, those things kind of coming up as a way to bridge the gap between smaller organizations that want to contribute to something as well. And actually on that topic, I mentioned network science. That's from a book called Reinventing Discovery by Michael Nielsen back in 2014. There are a couple, it's a really interesting book. We highly recommend it. A lot of it is kind of foundational to why we took this direction for our company. But there are a couple of questions that it brings up that I'm just going to read verbatim because I think it's an interesting way to set the stage. So high-level questions networking science brings up in general, like, will we one day see Nobel Prizes won by huge collaborations that might be dominated by amateurs? Or, what other ways can we find to build the bridge between science society. So things like citizen science has come up where, there are initiatives that try to engage the everyday citizen where you might not need to have specific domain knowledge to add value. And then the last thing I'll read from this book is really speaks to the importance of how network science and community driven science can impact the world for the better. So this is verbatim again. Improving the way science is done means speeding up the rate of all scientific discovery. It means speeding up things such as curing cancer, solving the climate change problem, launching humanity permanently into space. It means fundamental insights into the human condition, into how the universe works and what it's made of. It means discoveries we have not yet dreamt of.
So Sam,
nice.
we will have Nobel Prizes given to communities at some point in, near future.
Yeah, I think it's an element of scale in a sense, right? In a lot of ways, the academic machine learning community, I guess, community that we have today, like, is a community, right? There's individuals affiliated with different organizations that share the same goals. We've got these well-known benchmarks. We've got common data sets like ImageNet. We've got they when they advance the state of the art, they are fairly transparent about how they did it, right? That's research papers. So and often there are cross-organizational collaborations. The question is, like, what does that mean at the scale of the individual and at the scale of the internet, right? And I do think that we will, continue to see the impact of individuals coming together to collaborate in loosely coupled ways to increase. Whether that results in a Nobel Prize, I don't know, because academia, there's also like this political aspect of academics. And I would imagine that the Nobel Prize committee is well entrenched in, the traditional academic way of thinking about things. Maybe we need another group to recognize and acknowledge community scientific contributions.
Ooh, we should start something. So, like, a lot of sciences have Nobel, has field prize. Computer science has something, I don't remember it, unfortunately, but should have a community science prize. That's a good idea. We should reach out to Michael Nielsen and discuss it. Yeah, I mean, the whole Nobel Prize thing is more of an aspirational thing to me. Like, it is, a notion that you would, of course, like, it is extremely political, as you say, and it really depends on the hot topics of the day and blah blah blah. But there's a very interesting Stuff You Should Know podcast on Nobel Peace Prize, actually, that I would suggest checking out. But regardless, I think that's the aspirational notion. And I think the part that is very interesting for me is that in the past, probably distant past, we used to do a lot of things in communal ways, right? Like, we had to work as a group to survive. And then later, probably a few thousand years ago, we had to do things as a group because we wanted to build very, very huge things like pyramids, but we did it with a stick. We have gotten to a point that we're doing, like, as a group, we're getting and doing a lot of interesting things. And how the value of this can be measured is definitely very interesting. Like, definitely open source movement has made a huge difference. Like, a lot of the software we're using today is open source. Like, a bunch of people had gathered together and wrote it over time and allowed us to evolve it into something. So, like, from your observations, like, I feel in machine learning community, this whole thing is going to the next level. Like, we had a lot of people who were contributing to open source, but we see a lot of collaborative work across the communities within the communities happening in machine learning. So a question that has come up a few times in this episodes that we have done on community topic is, what is special about machine learning that is enabling people or empowering people, advising people somehow to come together and do these large scale projects that we almost don't see anywhere else in any other.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the machine learning community is the kind of only academic community that I've got, that I'm particularly close to. Um, and we often talk about how machine learning is, special in the way and degree of collaboration in the academic community. Tools like Archive, where people are publishing preprints, and um the conferences like NeurIPS. There's a lot of kind of collaborative energy within that community. It may be that the physics community says the same thing, and that the behavioral economics community says the same thing, and it's kind of everyone thinks that their community is special. I think that this community is special. And what is particularly interesting for me is the way that um kind of the masses like can get interested in the topic, identify a ton of great resources, my podcast, your community, tons of books and websites and courses, and find a lot of help in learning and getting involved. It Considering how important ML and AI is, the potential that they offer, both for good and not good. The accessibility of it is, I think, really important, and the diversity of people that are able to participate in machine learning and AI is super important. That's something that I've been dedicated to through the podcast, like giving and amplifying voices of a diverse community of practitioners. And I hear from people all the time that just kind of started from some interest, latched onto some resources, and were able to change their lives, change their career tracks, and really get involved in the broader MLAI community in big ways. So I think that's super important. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, 100%. I mean, I was recently, well, 2 years ago now. It's interesting that the 2 years of pandemic is completely erased in my memory. When I say recently, I mean 2019. So I was recently reading open source 8 software. And one of the very interesting things, like GitHub is a phenomenally interesting platform for me because it has revolutionized everything about software development.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was intended or it just organically happened, but well, I'm sure it is organically to a large extent. But and a lot of people have spent a lot of time researching, what happened there, like why did it work? And GitHub itself didn't invent Git. Git existed before them. But what GitHub did that is phenomenal, and a lot of research is that it significantly lowered the barrier of entry.
Yeah.
And then the culture that was built on top of, like a lot of mentorship, a lot of, you don't know, just typos in documentation, right? Documentation, etc. So there was something for everybody to do. And I think the machine learning community is taking that mindset, that mentality, and taking it a little to the next level, because now there is also a lot of industry interest. Like a lot of people are incentivized that if I learn these things, I can get paid better or whatever, have a better job, etc. Along with the fact that you're saying, as you were saying, availability of resources. Like it is very, very easy for people to learn and then do stuff. Our own community manager saying that he was really blown away when he joined our community, because within a few weeks he was working on models and he was implementing models that he normally expected people with PhDs to work on, right? But he was immediately unable to do that. And that's, I think, the phenomenal part about machine learning as general, machine learning in general, that, you know, the barrier of entry is really, really low. And that brings us very close to being as accessible as possible, but it's still about it more carefully about, you know, the diversity and access that you're talking about. There is still, you know, quite a long way to go, but I think we are moving in the right direction as a community. Definitely doesn't happen in physics. You probably have to have, you know, a lot of theoretical knowledge before you can do anything in physics. Although there are platforms that are solving that problem too that we can talk about later. But yeah, a very interesting question around accessibility.
Yeah, and I don't think it happens in the behavioral economics community either. Not that I'm super close in it, but I have a small aficionado interest in it. But I think one of the things that might be special about machine learning, and because it's closer to software development, but not quite that you need all of the background to do it unless you're going to become an ML engineer. And I think the accessibility kind of comes in that there are so many different parts of machine learning that touches every industry in every department that someone like me comes in, learned a little bit of front end development and realized I didn't want to spend dark hours in a corner by myself coding all day. Found another area where I could kind of add value and kind of enter in this world. But I think the interesting about machine learning is because you have open source and development as kind of a backbone with it, you can spin up, it's much less theoretical. Even on the research side, you might spin up a toy example with a toy data set to still get something out there. And it's easier to do that and put something interesting where someone else can come in and then add on top of it versus just talking theory back and forth where you might not be able to actually act on something.
Yeah, a couple things that triggers for me. One is, you know, yet another shout out to Rachel and Jeremy with Fast AI. Like the core of what they've been trying to do is, you know, in a sense, to provide a counterbalance to kind of the Andrew Ng course way of learning machine learning, which starts with, you know, Greek lettered equations and a strong theoretical foundation. You know, they've said, if you know how to code, you can learn machine learning without all the math. And they've built the course that demonstrates this and has, you know, successfully taught hundreds, if not thousands of people machine learning. And the other thing that I was thinking of was, this is a topic that came up in another podcast interview with gosh, I'm brain farting here, but we were talking about the idea that pre-trained models are creating kind of like a remix economy, you know, and enabling a new level of composability for machine learning. And I think also the broad availability of tools, you know, like Hugging Face, which we've talked about, you know, make it so that there's just a lot of off the shelf stuff that you can, you know, start with. It's, you know, very different from, you know, a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, when if you wanted to do something with machine learning, you had to collect the data set, you know, train it yourself, and you know, from scratch. You know, now, you know, you can pull a pre-trained model off the shelf, maybe fine tune it, and get a lot further.
In preparation for Gen, some resources, and Sam, you are, you know, one of the central places, one of the central of resources for folks, and I know you added some of your episodes to the recipe that we're sharing with folks. But I wanted to quickly ask everybody to say which of the resources they saw. Like if people or watch one artifact that we are sharing, which one should it be? Sam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm partial to the conversation that I mentioned with Thomas Wolfe from Hugging Face, which covers a big part of our conversation around big science. But I'm also super interested in this Reinventing Discovery book that Miriam mentioned by Michael Nielsen. I'll be checking that one out.
Okay.
I like it.
So this is the episode you're mentioning, right?
Yep.
All right, sounds good. Miriam, how about you?
Yeah, if I added some resources, and by the way, a recipe is what Amir is showing on his screen. It's this interactive guide collection of resources that we have available on our platform. We have hundreds of these around many topics, so you can explore others as well. One of the resources I added here was just an overview on one of the agencies in the U.S. called NIEHS, the National Institute Health Sciences. And the article is around community engaged research and citizen science. So it has a collection of a bunch of projects they're interested in. I'm not sure how many of these are using machine learning. They're using big data and things that are close to that. So if not there already, but it includes a list of a few and what they're working on. And if you're interested in getting involved or even just seeing how agencies like this structure community-driven initiatives like that, I think this is a good place to start.
All right, sounds good. So I probably have been going around telling people that Reinventing Discovery is my favorite book ever and really inspired me to start, aggregate intellect and what we're trying to do in it. So definitely, I recommend that. It's a sizable book though, so it might take you a minute to read it, but I have a few copies. Here that I occasionally come across people and I'm like, you should read this. So definitely highly recommend it. I did reading about Letter AI. I'm sure that's somewhere here. I will add it later. Oh, sorry. Here, there you go. So they wrote this blog post about at their, which is very, very interesting to read, about how so much serendipity around how they came together and then how they grew into really, competing with what OpenAI is doing and such, with a lot of people who were just like, what if we did this? Went on and did it. So that's quite inspiring. In such short amount of time, they achieved so much. So I'm very excited to see many, many more examples like that. There are a few other things included, but Reinventing Discovery also talks about them, like Galaxy Zoo and Foldit. Like Galaxy Zoo is this pretty much data annotation game. Cosmologists have shared a lot of it in a game-like environment where and say this to me, or this people, and they're using that to train very complex and this folding is challenging problem to solve computation. Created this game where people can literally try to fold a string of things in different ways to find the most effective ways to do it. So there are a lot of ways. I was very focused on machine learning community, but as Sam pointed out very correctly, probably all communities, the power of communities. On that topic, it's been 50 minutes, which went by so fast. We should probably start to wrap up. So Sam, thank you so much again for joining us. What's your verdict for what we talked about and a call to action to our audience?
Yeah, good question. I think it's find a group of people that have similar interests and goals, and who kind of you vibe with, and get involved. Learn together, build something together. Be active in the community, and it's life changing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So for us, find a community, find your people, build something cool. Sam has a great community. We have a community as well. We're doing projects together too, if you want to straddle both of them. And there's a lot of resources out there. You can check out the recipes. You can add things to the recipes as well. You can comment directly and add resources right in. If you feel like we missed something, that also helps the next person. This kind of asynchronous network science that we're doing in the background. So yeah, and if you want to join, again, the project specifically turning some of Sam's awesome podcasts into recipes and building out the resources, those, let us know, and we'd love to have you as part of the project.
Awesome.
Definitely. And my call to action is join us. Interesting open source project we are starting this summer. So a lot of the systems interested in these days in machine learning are based on search and information retrieval and recommender systems. A lot of them use very, not basic, same mechanics, more or less. But a lot of the systems don't provide explainability about why they are recommending something to you, or why search, or if they're extracting some information, why that information is relevant to what you care about. So we have this project called Explainable Information Retrieval. There's been a bunch of research, but we are partnering with folks at McGill. They renamed Metropolitan University, used to be Ryerson. So with Metropolitan University, and a lot of folks, we're essentially going to work on this open source, where we're going to create libraries that add explainability to information retrieval systems, either as a post hoc module or as an explainability component. So reach out, website, and see more information about it. On that topic, thank you so much again, Sam, for joining us today. It was a fun conversation. Make sure you check out, I'm sure all of you already listened to Thermal AI, but if you don't, you're missing out.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sam.